So, good afternoon, and welcome to another session of an Author's Afternoon organized by the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. An Author's Afternoon is an initiative by the Foundation to bring great minds of literature to the patrons. It is a space created by the Foundation for book lovers to rendezvous with some of the best writers of the country. The Foundation has geared up their efforts to bring their love for literature to the patrons even during the lockdown. The Foundation changed their sessions to virtual for patrons to tune in from the comfort of their homes. Our author this afternoon is Koral Dasgupta. Koral has published 5 books ranging from comedy to classics. Her 4th book, a comedy called Summer Holidays, has been optioned for screen adaptation. Her 5th book, Ahalya, is also the first of a 5-part Sati series. She is a literary entrepreneur, discovering new voices through her story laboratory, www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Her work is recognized in the list of Innovator 25 Asia Pacific 2019. In conversation with her today is Shraddha Murdia, a cultural and literary enthusiast and our Ehsaas woman from Udaipur. We will have a Q&A session after the talk. So if any of you have any questions, please press on the raise your hand icon on your screens and we will take your questions. Over to you, ladies. Relax and enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Esha. Hello, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well wherever you are. And it seems that we are thriving, literally thriving on the good side of technology. We cannot meet each other, but we can always see and talk to each other. So welcome to this virtual session of an Author's Afternoon. And today we have with us a proficient young author, Miss Koral Dasgupta, with us. And she dons many hats. She is a mother, a wife. She's an author, an auteur. She's a literary entrepreneur. And I'm sure there's much more on the list which Koral should tell us about. So welcome, Koral, to this virtual session. And it's great to have you. It's truly that you are such a multi-skilled, multifaceted woman of substance. I'd like to know that which role is your favorite part to play?
Thank you, Shraddha. My favorite role is the first word that you had used for me. That is the role of a mother, because that defines my entrepreneurship from the very basis of it. I think that's who I am primarily, not only in creating opportunities for the future, but also in preparing another brain for economic development in future. So intellectually and in terms of my country's economy, in terms of my country's betterment, I am trying to do my best as a mother. Looking
That's
at
lovely.
the future.
That's lovely. As I said, you're truly a woman of substance. You were born and raised in Calcutta. You're now in Mumbai for a decade. So have you turned into a Mumbaikar, or Bengal still dwells in you? How is it?
It's an interesting question, because there had been times when I have been in Kolkata and I have been attending events, and I have seen that Koral Dasgupta, someone has written Bombay in bracket. So I just asked them that who on earth had this in their brilliance? I mean, whose brain was it to write Bombay behind my name? But nobody raised their hands. But yes, Calcutta at times does that to me, to disown me for whatever conspiracy plays. But I am not doing it ever in my life. I am still a Calcuttan.
Of all the roles that you play, you are with us today as a prolific writer and author. Has your raising up peers, your bringing up peers, has that an influence or impact in your writings today, what you do, or is it completely out of your wonderful imagination?
Oh, I think Calcutta is culturally and very deeply, not only Calcutta, Bengal as a whole, it's very deep into art, culture, literature for different reasons. I mean, the kind of nature that it has, the kind of language that we have, it is said to be a very sweet language. The kind of language that we have, the kind of culture that we have. For example, I have grown up seeing uh, different sides of politics within my family. There has been table smashing arguments over dinner table. The bowl of dal would topple over someone, but there has never been an animosity. So whatever happens on social media today, a part of it I have seen and I have known, and a part of it that constantly abuses and cuts off relationships, that part of it I haven't known. I have known the beginning of it. I have never seen the end of it, because in our culture, people argue for a reason. They put their points forward very aggressively, very robustly. But that doesn't sever ties. That only makes people aware of another school of thought. And that has never been, that has never sounded, very threatening for the other school of thought. That is how we have grown up. Otherwise, in literature, in culture, I had a library at my home. I think most of us had. And my parents were working, and we were a nuclear family. So the options that we have had, the entertainment options that we had, were only books. And my mother had a very rich taste for books. So that occupied a large part of my growing up years. My father was a person with, not only my father was a person with very smooth and favorable sense of humor. And there were also another part. My mother, for example, is a person with a very wicked sense of humor. So she'll be sarcastic, but you will laugh. So all those elements have poured in different aspects. And coming to writing, when I was small, my mother says now, which I never accept. My mother says that I was a very big liar when I was small. I mean, she says that there has never been a bigger liar, because I would do my little frauds at everything. So now I tell her that that was my prep period to be a fiction author. So that has been about my upbringing, my.
So it's a great mix of your imagination and all the wit that you've inherited. Yes. So you've actually written on a varied genre, I mean, from a sibling rivalry to, a comedy to some serious stuff. And how does that happen? I mean, how do you actually inculcate and incept those concepts in you?
So, writing for me is not a way to show off my skills. Never. For me, writing was to live the different kinds of lives that I would have loved to live, but then I'm only one person in this vast world, and the number of talents that I would love to acquire is too many. So I would have my initial and very dear dream was to be a sculptor.
Oh, wow.
So I couldn't, because I had some medical issue. I have a very bad migraine problem. So, and sculpting as acquiring that craft would mean long exposure, a lot of strain to your eyes. So I was medically advised not to go for it. But so my first fiction is the story of a sculptor. I wanted to be one. I became one in my own way. And so all the genres that you are talking about are flashes that I got in my life, in my waking up stage, where I saw certain people. I kind of, I mean, usually everyone, each one of us has a secret world inside our brain. And when someone's secret world is a little too overwhelming or a little too dominating on the head that they tend to come out, and usually they come out either in the form of cinema or as a book or in some other kind of art. Art is actually your dreams jumping out of your head. So my books are that. I wanted to be a Bharatanatyam dancer because along with the craft, I just loved their costumes, their makeup, their jewelry. So I love to be one. Uh, an artist, a painter, a graphic designer is something I have acquired a little bit of it. I have done my graduation from Shantiniketan. So I was supposed to be studying economics, but I was never found in the economics department. I would be in Kalabhavan looking at what people are doing, and especially in the sculpting department. So I have picked up a few things, and yeah, I had just poured them, channelized them in some way or the other to figure out how life is that way. So I couldn't become a sculptor, a dancer, or a graphic designer. I have written books to live that journey anyway.
So truly living a life of many in one. You are an example to all of us, from teaching consumer behavior to students of management to sculpting books now, probably. Yeah, it's a long journey and a happy one, I believe. And here I have this wonderful book, if all of you can see, Ahalya. And this is written by Koral Dasgupta. And what a brilliant rendition of an age-old story. Congratulations, Koral, on this book, entirely from a woman's point of view. It has the pathos of a loner, of a woman who was nurtured by nature, who's the daughter of Brahma himself, the creator of the universe. What was going in your mind? There is a symphony of creation and emotion in this book. What really attracted you to Panchkanya? I must tell all our listeners that this is Koral's 5th book and the first one in the Sati series, and a fantastic job done here. Please tell us about Panchkanya from your, what is your perception? Panchkanya, according to the epics, is 5 virgins. But what is it to you? Please tell us about it.
Women legends from our mythology, I felt has been oft ignored, has not been spoken enough about. And today we are, of course, Panchkanya is about the epics. I mean, today we discuss about the purity of the mind having more importance than the purity of the body. But so many days ago, in the ancient texts, we have this concept of Panchkanya, where these 5 ladies have been called 5 virgins. You may not know enough about Mandodari, Tara, but then Ahalya, Kunti, Draupadi, almost everybody knows. Kunti and Draupadi at least.
Yeah.
Why should they be called virgins? So when I tried to think about it, I was amazed that, okay, they are being called virgins because these women have had the courage to express themselves with great honesty. And so probably the epics are talking about the purity of mind, the purity of character, the strength of character compared to the strength or purity of the body. And that is so progressive, that is so modern. Today we are trying to establish, which means that in the ancient ages, when these scriptures were being written, or when this literature was being conceived, things were so progressive and we messed it up so much in between. And today, again, we are talking about it and we are trying to push the conversation in that direction. When I had, since childhood, actually, I had fat books of Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Bengali translations in our collection. And all my holidays would start with reading the Ramayana and the Mahabharata because I was somehow very fascinated with both these epics and different concepts of Indian gods, the concept of Kali, the concept of Shiva, all of these have always enamored me because I could find the trend, there is a correlation.
Yes.
Shiva blends into Krishna, Krishna blends into Kali, Kali blends into Indra. There is a complete correlation. And the other aspect of it is that Hinduism as a philosophy, okay,
Yes.
has always considered nature more powerful than humans.
Truly. Yeah.
So it has always worshipped nature, and it has always advised and advocated that don't try to mess with nature, don't try to think that you are bigger than nature. So you see, all the gods and goddesses are nature, Agni,
Yeah.
Varun, all of them. Some kind of relationship, some kind of Surya, all of them are nature actually. Uh, when it comes to the women legends, especially Panchkanya, one I told you about this very theory of the purity aspect, and along with that, I felt that all these five women have actually uh, explained or expressed various aspects of nature. They're in some way or the other very close to the nature. And now when I try to figure more, uh, okay, there are a lot more, interesting correlations that I found. For example, Indra.
Yeah.
Indra in Rig Veda was the only god and the most powerful god, even more powerful than Vishnu, right?
Yes.
In later
Gods of the
texts,
heavens.
yes, in later texts, they explained Indra as far more, a nuisance creator.
Yes.
But Indra, the way he was conceived initially, he was
Yes.
a very powerful god. So I was always fascinated by this aspect of Indra, that who is this? I mean, there is no popular literature or no popular form of art has actually delved deep into Indra to try to figure out who Indra is. So
Yeah.
that was also my interest. And in the life of all the Panchkanyas, Indra appears in some form or the other. So it also came to me that if you say that Indra is a loafer, Indra is uh, he is one person, he is one such god who is lusting after women.
Yeah.
And here you are talking purity, right?
Yes.
So you are actually trying to create that contrast, that unless and until you have the contrast, you don't have the base. So purity, these people are pure because there is a contrast somewhere in place, right? So these are very interesting things that came to me when I was thinking. And when I wrote Ahalya, I had in mind that there is a possibility of Panchkanya. So when I approached the publishers, I had this very clear in my mind that we are talking either about Panchkanya or we are talking about Nan. So I didn't have to fight about this for too long because I had probably written a 2-sentence pitch to Pan Macmillan and it was taken.
Absolutely. And, I'd like to dig deeper in this, deep rooted mythological philosophy of yours. But before that, with your permission, I'd like to read a passage from the book which really struck me and, which says, I'll speak this, that earthlings are strange creatures. They try to correct the decisions of God, seeking help of astrology. They aim to manipulate birth, life, and death, stealing through the pre-constructed diagrams, sometimes unwilling to bear their share of the earthly burden. They try to end their lives before Brahma had willed. This was really interesting. I found that how did this come to your mind? Because as humans, we always try to correct and put right, something that we see is not, going our way. And, maybe we seek help. But how did you find this, or how did you manage to, put this challenge in the belief that, God probably doesn't prefer tampering of the destinies? Please share your thought about it.
Actually, this is the truth of my life. I have felt and I observe a lot. That's a part of the job for every author.
Yeah.
I have felt this truth in my life that every time I really wanted something, I longed for something and I prayed very hard that God, please give me, and I have got it. In the long run, it didn't do well for me. I may have got that momentary happiness that I asked for something and I got it. But then in the long run, it felt that it would have probably been better had I not asked for it.
Oh.
There, there are many such instances. I mean, not every time I got it. For example, there are also instances with my entrepreneurship. There was a time when I was asking very, very deeply to God that I should be able to raise funds for my venture. And there was nothing was just working out. I just couldn't convince anybody that that venture, the idea of that venture holds. And then such things happened in between. I mean, I just constantly prayed and I constantly asked that, why aren't you giving me? I mean, I am working so hard. Why isn't it happening?
Yes.
And then after some time, such things happened that now when I think back, I think that God has saved me by not giving me that, that opportunity at that time. Because had I got that opportunity and used it, I would have been in deep soup today. So I often felt that we don't know the complete journey of our life, right? We don't know the complete spread. God who has given us our life and knows the journey, is probably in a better position to decide that what will work in the long run. So if you really love God and if you really want to do that worship, and I am not an atheist, I have very deep faith in God, but I don't worship God every day. Like I don't stand with folded hands every day. Many people have, when people got to know that I'm writing Sati series, many people have said that you should do a puja for Suraj because that will, give you better merit. You should meditate. I have nothing against these, but it didn't work for me. When I tried, I just felt that those 5-10 minutes were more precious. I should, do something else.
Work is worship.
Yeah. And then actually my mother explained just what you said. I told about this to my mother and she said that, why are you trying so hard? Because when you are writing, your writing is your meditation. I mean, don't try to do things forcefully just because someone else is telling you that it is good for you. Anyway, coming back. So I did feel that we are trying to forcefully put things inside our lives and make things happen without knowing the larger plan, without knowing the larger spread. God knows the larger spread. And if I have complete faith in God, I will probably not try to tell him that you should plan my journey this way. I would rather just trust. Bad things will happen. I have to just trust that it is a part of the larger game. I will try to do my best, but if something which is not so favorable that happens, I have to just let it pass. I have to endure it. But trying to correct God might be disastrous.
Absolutely. I think I resonate with you. I connect with you there. And, coming to the leading character of your book, Ahalya, I mean, that life that she led, the book is so poetic and lyrical, and you've added the cruelest of episodes, you've added so much euphemism in it, and it just looks like a woman's tender care is there, and all of that in one book. It's emotionally very strong, and I just wanted to know that, Ahalya, for you, this woman who's a loner, who had the power of beauty and care, for others, just because, she had all the feminine qualities. She had other passions. How, and also being the daughter of Brahma, he sculpted her. Yet she was trying to find her feet on the ground. I mean, yet she had to go through all the, plight of emotions. uh, who is Ahalya for you? I mean, she just seems like an ordinary woman.
Actually, for me, feminism, I mean, very personally, feminism is not a very robust, mirror cracking kind of thing. I mean, I don't believe in feminism. I believe in femininity, rather. And I feel that in our feminist conversations, often what we are ending up doing is we are ending up giving away our femininity. So Ahalya is one person who is not ashamed or who cannot be dominated by anybody who is a foreign body trying to come and tell her that you are not enough. That is the way I had seen her, you know. So you see today in the world, I mean, this could be a very controversial statement to make, but I'll still make it. That today in the world, I see many feminists talking about the financial independence of women. And so telling them that if you are qualified, and even if you are not qualified, if you are capable, you should go out and work because financial independence is very important. So I often try to ask, and it's a very, this is a question which unsettles, it's uncomfortable for anybody to answer. I often ask that, are you trying to say that homemaker's service doesn't have any value because she is not going out and working? I mean, if you are saying that you should be financially independent, have men been told that you should be domestically independent? Because if the woman is trying to take care of everything in the home, then she is entitled to the money that comes in the home, right? Yeah. Why does she have to go out and work to be financially independent? And if she doesn't go out and work, why will she not have the complete, respect of doing whatever she is doing, and she is doing so well, right? So I see Ahalya in that kind of a setup where she has made her choice. There are women who are best in homemaking. They don't want to, trade that with anything else. They are not interested in establishing that they are also something else. They are happy with homemaking, and that is not only in India. I was just reading a report, and that this is something that had come a year back, where New York Times had come up with a report that many extremely well-to-do women, extremely well-qualified women in the US are opting to be a homemaker once they have had their babies, because that is their way of building on the home, and they consider the home as an equal participant in the economic and social stability of their country. Yeah. This is a communication, or this is a sense that really, really needs to be drilled into this Indian social system. Because I often see that there are dowry issues, and then just some time back, there was a social media conversation, and there was a social media uproar about a woman who had walked out of her marriage because of dowry issues. The way I looked at the matter is that the lady had wanted to marry that guy because she wanted a home, right? She was not looking forward to be a social media heroine. She wanted to marry. But then something happened because of which she had to walk out. For some days, we made her a very big star. Now nobody knows about her. Is she happy? Probably she is not. But in our women empowerment discourse, in our women empowerment strategies, we have never included a man. Yes. We have only included the woman. And that is such a myopic thing to do. It doesn't work. So when it is very important for us to understand this role of the woman and respect that role of the woman and celebrate that role of the woman. And I felt that our understanding of ourselves, I mean, at every era, any intellectual conversation or any intellectual thinking would go back to, that question of who am I, or where do I come from? And when you keep going back, you go back through art, literature, culture. And at some point of time, as you keep going back, you hit upon the myth and mythology. Yes. It is very important to have the mythological interpretation done like this, so that there is a discourse of this effect as well.
Yes. I agree. And, so I just wanted to, ask you that in the concept of, Panch Kanya, where they've had more partners than their husbands, or, so, how do you take this concept of adultery in that era? They still, they carry the baton of infidelity. And was that the time that it was introduced, or is it, this era that we call it this way?
I think infidelity is something which is very circumstantial in every which way. It depends upon person to person. Instead of writing it off on a moral policing scale, it would be interesting, or it would be more fair to look at it on a case-to-case basis. Because when you see infidelity in art, literature, culture, you call it a classic. When it comes to real life, you call that woman a bitch. Right? It is a very big, hypocrisy is a very strong term. I would not like to use that. But I think we need a far more openness of mind to actually look into people's lives and be a little less judgmental about the choices that they make. Every person's need is unique, and every person has the right to be happy. And I also do believe that nothing happens on nothing is unidirectional. So right now, when you know that someone in your neighborhood has cheated upon her husband or on the wife, you immediately form a judgment without trying to know, or probably you don't have the time or interest to know what actually led to that. So it's best not to be judgmental and leave that aspect to the people involved, because they are the ones who know best how to handle themselves and how to handle the problems that they have created by themselves.
Yes. So even if it's consequential, consequential, and even if it's out of emotion, would you say that adultery is justified?
Just come again on that.
I said, even if you say it's consequential, and it's out of emotion, would you say that infidelity, or say adultery, is that justified in today's culture and day and age?
That's just the point that I'm making, that when I say that it is justified, or when I say that it is not justified, I'm being judgmental. Why even try to do that? Because it depends upon a case-to-case basis. We might take a call. You might say today that I will never be that. But the fact is that when I had a boyfriend and I was some 20 years old, I was fantasizing Shah Rukh Khan. Would you call it infidelity, or you wouldn't call it infidelity? I don't know. But the fact is that it does fall into the same bracket of study, right? Yeah.
So, I see that because, how you picked these women, who with probably no fault of theirs, they carry that baton. And I think we really needed to speak about them. And you've done that very, very well. So all these, concepts and contexts that we've spoken about. There's one more thing that I'd like to ask you, that is attaining wisdom against chastity?
No.
No.
Chastity is, we have been told to think about these terms in a particular way. When it comes to chastity, you will find this word being used more for women and never for men, right? So we have learned to look at it in a particular way. We have been culturally taught to think of these things from a woman's perspective. You know, just some time back, I feel that when I was a child, I was told Ahalya's story from the perspective of the politics of that era, right? And today we are in a different era of politics. And when I say politics, I don't necessarily mean the country politics. I mean the politics of gender, the politics of society, the politics of rationality, all of that. So I think that there is an openness, or there is a possibility of these texts be used for creating an alternate communication on feminism. You know, some time back, my son, he is 8-year-old now, and he loves mythology. His source of mythology is mainly the teleserials, and he also reads a lot. So he had a lot of problem that how could Kunti abandon Karna? Why did she? How could she? I could understand that he is trying to understand whether I can do that. So I had to explain it to him from his context. That why did, so I told him that, you know, there are certain decisions which are taken not as not because people love to do that, but because there is a need to do that. And it was an obligation for Kunti to leave Karna to Surya, his father. So he frowned and he said that, when did she leave Karna to Surya? So I told him that Surya is the all observer, right? He is observing everything. So Kunti basically left, Kunti didn't orphan Karna. Kunti just left him to his father. So there are times when your father goes to Delhi and you are with me. So it is something like that. She left him to Karna and had to shift somewhere else.
Yes.
So he asked me, were they divorced? So I said, yes, kind of. It was an arrangement of that sort where she couldn't attend to the child. The father attended. It's fine, right? I mean, when your father is not there, I attend to you. So when the mother was not there, the father attended. These kind of explanations, these kind of questions, first of all, were not asked when we were small. We never asked these questions. These kind of explanations were not given to us. So I believe that in femininity conversations, in the conversations that lead to the formation of your brain, these stories can play a part. It depends upon how they are told and how they are absorbed. So even when it comes to chastity, it is important for all of us to understand that it is important to, you know, divorce these words chastity from femininity. Feminine power can actually spread and fountain in many directions. Chastity definitely being one of them. But let us not try to judge and define chastity in a way that limits the woman beyond the things that she should do, or the things that the steps that she should take for her own empowerment.
Absolutely. And I asked you that because somewhere you, in your book, you know, you write the wife of a recluse doesn't pursue pleasure. And, you know, that's how I thought I must ask you that, you know, is it all going against the nature and natural feelings, you know? And I see here it is, you know. There's one more thing which, you know, I'd like to know from you, Coral, that, you know, when you speak about gender, so, you know, when we talk about the concepts of Ardhanarishwar and, you know, Adi Shakti and Shiv Shakti, where do you place gender disparity when we talk about these, you know, in today's world, when we talk about these concepts?
That's a very interesting thing to look at it, you know. This is a part of my next manuscript, which is Kunti, that actually this entire gender thing finds its roots in the discussion of masculinity and femininity, which in Adi words are described as Prakriti and Purusha, right? Purusha or masculinity is the more aggressive form of expression, and it is short-lived, it's temporary. Prakriti is the more permanent form of expression, and it is tender and it is more long-lived, it is permanent. Now, any human being can have either of, all of us are a combination of Purusha and Prakriti. And that is the philosophical explanation as well as the biological explanation. Having said that, when it comes to defining our character, some of us might have the Purusha stronger in us, some of us might have Prakriti stronger in us, right?
Yes.
And that has nothing to do with a man and a woman context. There are men who have very strong feminine sides. Most of the people in art, be it Shah Rukh Khan, be it Srijit Mukherjee, they have very strong feminine side to them. And that is the reason that they can voice the woman's perspective so well. Rituparno Ghosh was another very strong feminine side. And then there is the Purusha, which is the more aggressive form of expression. I don't think I have to name anybody to tell you that who are those who have very strong Purusha aspect in them. You open Twitter and you see them all. I don't want to start a revolution right here. But they have very strong Purusha angle in them, Purusha personality in them. So it is not that a man has to have that Purusha aspect only, and a woman has to have that Prakriti angle only. Masculinity and femininity are present all across, depending upon the character or depending upon the choice of a person or depending upon the upbringing and growth of a person. But we have given it is a completely attitudinal and characteristic and philosophical discourse. We, in our dumbness, we in our rigidity, have made it a completely gender discourse and messed it up completely. So when you say Ardhanarishwar, we all are Ardhanarishwars.
Yes.
Definitely not a 50-50 division, but then we all have our Purusha angle when we are very, very aggressive. And we all have our Prakriti angle, which are very, very subdued and tender and progressive, you know.
That's a beautiful explanation to, the elements that we possess. I think one of the most beautiful explanations, I have heard about it. And I think it clears, all the air among, all of us and within us about the gender disparity. I think we're short on time, Koral. I think I had a couple of more things. This was just going so well. But let's quickly, discuss about your entrepreneurial, initiatives. Tell me your story. .biz. Please share your, experience about it and elaborate about it.
Actually, when we started Tell Me Your Story.biz, it was a very simple idea, because I, being a published author, I know that traditional publishing cannot publish everybody. But then every person has a story, right? A very defining story. And those stories are important, because I felt that right now, so many things are happening to all of us. So there would be a news channel who would tell you or force it on you that this is a very happy time to live in. And there is another news channel which will tell you that we are devastated, we are finished, our life is doomed. shouldn't the people's individual stories happening in their own lives tell us whether they are happy or sad instead of news channels doing that? So we just did that. And it was a very interesting thing. A lot of interesting things came out. To tell you about, I mean, two are something that I have in the tip of my tongue. One is one lady from Bengal and another from Pakistan. They were from two completely different socioeconomic strata. There was no chance that they know each other or have any kind of correlation. They submitted the same story once. It was Eid.
Oh my God.
Yes, it was a Eid special, and we were seeking Eid themed stories. And these two stories were exactly the same. It was about sweet rotis prepared by their grandmother, memoirs of their grandmother. These things actually make you feel that life is so simple and people are so simple. And we are ending up hating, we are ending up fighting, we are ending up not talking to each other. I mean, not even getting there. Then these things tell a lot about the era that you belong to. Another aspect that I can give you is a couple of years before, we were seeking Diwali stories. And most of these people, there were about 8 to 10 stories that had come up. And most of these stories were, most of these writers were connected to me in social media, and I could see that they are hosting card parties, their dinner tables are laid, and they're happy. But all the 8 stories that had come as a part of this collection were dark stories. So it obviously brings you to consider that, are people really happy? Why would people write dark stories for Diwali? Why would they, someone is writing about poverty, someone is writing about some kind of death.
Yes.
So you trying to understand that somewhere in their subconscious, when you are talking, your conscious is talking. When you are writing, it's your subconscious that is playing. Somewhere in the subconscious, something is not right. And that is where, I mean, as much as you celebrate Diwali, you are not internally happy unless and until something is set right. These are some amazing observations that we got. And so when 2020 set out, and I was wondering that what is the next step to take, because this had already happened and I was swarming to take the next step.
Yes.
And then the lockdown had set in. Frankly, during lockdown, we have flourished. Before that, we were wondering what to do. Lockdown, things just fountained out. So my dream was to do an academic interpretation of the stories and read the stories from an academic perspective, trying to understand the contemporary era through these stories. These are the stories of this era, right? So these are contributing to the history of this era. If academics doesn't pick them up and analyze them and interpret them or read between the lines, how will you understand the communication of this era? So during lockdown, that is what I have been able to do. We have started our quarterly journal, and that is in collaboration with global professors, where we are bringing up a lot of very interesting content. Our present call for essays is about the few very talented artists that we have very unfortunately lost in the scape of Indian cinema, and we are seeking essays on them: Rishi Kapoor, Irfan Khan, Sushant Singh Rajput, Saroj Khan, and S.P. Balasubramanian. And we will include a special essay on Soumitra Chatterjee as well. And then there are also simultaneously, we are doing story collections, which is the present collection of stories are something that we are doing with on the northeast of India. So there are 5 influencers or raconteurs who have given us story prompts, and they are very interesting. I mean, the raconteurs are ranging from, Mamang Dai to Dipanta Sharma to Mr. BP Singh, who happened to be the governor of Sikkim, IPS Brinda Shukla, S. Mitra Kalita, who is heading CNN in America. So they have given us story prompts, and we have invited people to use those story prompts and set up stories based in the Northeast, so that people think about the region. And this particular project will celebrate the nature, culture, people, and perceptions related to the Northeast. So these are some kind of work that we are doing. Along with that, we are hosting a lot of conversations, mainly with authors and professors. And with professors, with authors, we are doing the simple understanding of the craft and the books. But with professors, what we do is something very interesting. So there are a lot of academic books that happen, right? And these academic books somewhere get published by Oxford University Press, and they go into libraries, and the common people don't even know what research has gone into that. So we talk to the professors across the world and try to demystify those research in layman's terms, so that if there is a research on something, sometime back that we spoke to a professor of sociology from South Africa who had researched on the tribes of Madhya Pradesh. So we actually got him to talk about the problems of these tribes from a very layman's perspective, so that people of India get to understand what this research is about and what are his findings. It's important. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. That only the scholars read it and they put it back in the library. So these are the kind of stuff that we are doing in Tell Me Astronomy.
Great. This is a wonderful initiative, and I think we all have stories to tell and to hear and to vent out ourselves. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and all those who are hearing, I'm sure you're going to be swarmed by stories soon. And I think with this, we come to an end because we're short on time. And my huge recommendation for all the listeners, Ahalya is a wonderful book about this beautiful loner. And, it has been very delicately written. And it's a must read. And Koral, thank you so much for being with us. And now we have a Q&A session. Aisha, it's your turn now. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Koral.
Thank you, ladies. Okay, I think we have a question. Let me just read it out, Koral, for you.
Sure.
Good evening, ma'am. Really enjoying this session. Since you pick up some serious issues like infidelity, women, and other societal turmoils in your works, how do you bring in the comedy? Since these are all contradictory elements and need certain amount of genius to blend into a smooth, sensible narrative. What are your thoughts about it?
I woke up this morning with the announcement of Booker's Prize being announced. And the first thing that came to my mind is this question, that when on earth will anybody, any part of the world, treat comedy with respect? Because you see,
the sound is a little.
Can you hear me now? Because I haven't.
Becomes very soft suddenly.
I haven't moved. Is it?
Just check.
It's fine actually.
Is it okay?
We can hear. Yeah, it's okay.
So yeah, I was saying that. I was going through the Booker's Prize announcement, and I was just thinking that when on earth will anybody treat comedy with respect? Because if you see, literature festivals never have a session on comedy. Most of the prizes that are received has always been on stories that are of pain, that are talking about some kind of loss. People treat loss with a lot of respect. People treat pain with pains like a classic, which of course it is. But comedy is very difficult to write. It is not easy if I say a joke, you might laugh, but it will not stay with you. Planning a comedy in a way that is unique and unheard and actually trickles a comic bone in your body, it's a very difficult job to do. And I'm really, really waiting for the day when comedy will be treated with respect, and JCB or a Booker will award a comedy book for the work, for making people laugh, because I really believe that laughter is the need of this season, of this generation, because people are forgetting how to laugh. They have learned how to be angry, or they have learned how to be sad. So I think your question comes from the fact that I have written a comedy book. It comes to me naturally because I love to laugh. I love to make fun, preferably of myself, because I dare not make fun of others. I'll be thrown out. But if you look around with very consciously, you will find a lot of fun aspects around your own, existence and about yourself. I mean, when you are really angry, like really angry, I'm telling you this, do this and you see the difference. When you are really angry, either take a selfie or stand in front of a mirror to look at yourself. Later, when you think of it, you will actually laugh. Or later, when you see, you will actually laugh. Because it is really funny. Most of the times, we are angry about really stupid things. And it is important for us to later revisit those times and have a good laugh. That had I been stupid, try it.
Okay, before I go on, is the sound okay, Anindita? Because I'm getting a very muted sound.
No, it is okay. We can hear you perfectly.
You can hear me perfectly?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Because then there's something wrong with my volume. Okay, I'm going on to the next question, Coral. Just a second. Okay, the earlier question I forgot to mention was from Sakshi Salil, and the next one is from Lolita Dev. Hello, really looking forward to reading your book. In terms of personality, how would you describe Ahalya? Was she enigmatic and mysterious as a woman, or something more?
Okay, thank you, Sakshi, for the question earlier, and hi, Lolita. The way I see Ahalya, she is as simple and as non-happening a woman as any one of us are. And I see that all of us in our own ways are very special. In our own ways, we are trying to create a difference. In our own ways, we are trying to make our lives special. In our own ways, we are trying to make the lives of our families and those in our world. We are trying to add value to each other's lives. And especially, we dedicate ourselves in doing that in our little big ways. Ahalya is no more enigmatic or mysterious than that. Of course, she has her elements of mystery, but just as much as we all do. You know, I often find this particular conversation very, very pressurizing. If you look at the way literature has defined us, and that is nothing against literature, that is about us, the readers. Literature has defined us as beautiful. We have thought that beautiful means having big eyes, having a strong border of kajal, red lipstick on your lips, having a very pointed nose. Literature may have defined these things because they wanted to create an impact. But each and every person is beautiful in their own way, and so is Ahalya. You know, so our beauty lies in the fact that we make our own choices, we take our own decisions, we sometimes try to be very brave in the way we think of ourselves. I mean, if we delve into ourselves, into our minds, we will find ourselves to be a very different person compared to what the world has made us, because we are responding to someone else's need of who we should be compared to what we originally were. We grew up into something and we picked up those ideas and tried to define ourselves according to what is expected or what is okay. Ahalya is that person who doesn't need any kind of any kind of support from others to be who she is. She can be herself without the endorsements without without a tick mark beside her, which society has granted to her. She can be herself by just her choice. That's her courage, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't think, oh, is there one more question? Okay, I think we just got one last question. I'll just quickly ask this one. This is from Anjana Bhavania. Her question, is it then time to demystify women and femininity and female empowerment?
Thanks, Anjana. I really don't believe that, I don't believe in this term called women empowerment. In fact, I find it very insulting. Women don't need empowerment. We are very, very powerful. We have a very strong, we have strong personalities, and we have very strong minds to be able to sustain whatever we go through and still keep our sanity. We don't need any kind of empowerment. We are already empowered. What is required is social empowerment. What is required is for men to understand that for example, when we were children, I often heard people saying that I am bringing up my daughter like she is my son. And these days I tell people that I am bringing up my son like he is my daughter. And this is not something that I am saying just to make a statement, you know, I really mean it. I really mean that I need him to grow up with compassion. I need him to understand the importance of every human being in his life, irrespective of the gender. I have grown up seeing ladies in my house giving away everything to the demands of the man or the boy. I will tell you something quickly and very specifically, that we come from a culture where if for example, meals, right? If the boy loves something, we keep on putting more and more in their plate without telling them that boss khatam ho raha hai, right? They have not been taught to see that they are asking it more and more because they have loved it. But whether there is more for the females in the house, they have not been taught to look at that. Now, food is something very existential, you know. If you tell that person that it is important for him to quench his love for a food item, and it is not important for the females of the house to have it, the communication that goes is his right to exist is far more than the right of the females to exist. So be very careful about these kind of things. And yes, it is very important to demystify things. I am very careful about passing these kind of communications to my son. If he asks for something and there is not much left, I show him and I tell him that this is my share, I can't give you. As a mother, I don't consume it because it hurts. My son had asked for it. I give it to him later. But I never give it to him in a way that he knows that it is important for him to have and it is not important for me to have. So these things I think are very important. And yes, it is very important to demystify those femininity loggerheads which we have in our head. They are very deep rooted. It will not go in a day. But the more we observe and the more we are conscious, they will keep appearing to us.
Okay, I think that's the end of all the questions.
Aisha, can I just take the liberty of asking one last question?
Thank you, Prabha Khaitan Foundation and our sponsors, Taj Bengal and Shree Cements. It was a brilliant session, very, very interesting. And we are looking forward to many more such. Thank you so much, ladies.